Okay, so getting into the Batman tie-in for Green Lantern Blackest Night, this is actually pretty cool. And a lot of the tie-ins they're actually a lot more interesting than you would think they would be, because the tie-ins as a whole serve the purpose of like beefing up the whole Blackest Night story, but also showing us what these different characters are doing at the time that Blackest Night is happening, what the Justice Society is doing, what Superman's doing, what Batman's doing, so on and so forth. This one, of course, again, will focus on Batman, but the idea with the first part of the story, which is to say the video that we covered last week, that part of the story was designed to focus on the fact that the dead were basically just rising. Now, we knew it was because of Black Lantern rings. The superheroes of Earth were slowly starting to figure out it was Black Lantern rings, but they didn't realize how big it was. But again, this story actually comes as part of the aftermath of the death of Batman. Now, the death of Batman was actually a pretty big moment in the realm of DC Comics, and the reason why is because writer Grant Morrison had basically taken the pen up and written Final Crisis. But the idea was that Morrison wanted to basically rework the Batman mythos, or at the very least, start this new saga of Batman. And so really, it was like this three-part trilogy, more or less. It was Final Crisis, where Batman was believed to have died at the hands of Darkseid. And then it was The Return of Bruce Wayne, which actually told us that Batman didn't die. Instead, he was basically time displaced, going all the way back to the earliest days of mankind and literally working his way up through the history of humanity back to the modern day. Now, of course, at this moment right now, when this tie-in is being written, Batman's believed to have been dead. We know he's in the past, but nobody else knows that. And so ultimately what ends up happening is that because of the fact that the rise of the Black Lanterns basically led to William Hand, kind of like this avatar of the Black Lantern Corps, so to speak, or basically their first member, traveling to the Wayne cemetery, more or less, grabbing the skull of Bruce Wayne and then racing off. What it also did is it disturbed the remains of Thomas and Martha Wayne. Now, in terms of why William Hand took the skull, or at least the perceived skull of Bruce Wayne, is actually something that's explained later on. Now, keep in mind, when this story is written, everybody thinks it's Bruce Wayne. Everybody thinks the body in that coffin is Bruce Wayne. Of course, I don't mind dropping that little bit of a spoiler, just because of the fact that by now, it's pretty much common knowledge among most people that Batman didn't actually die. But it's still kind of a bit of an interesting situation, because from the perspective of Dick Grayson and Damian Wayne, it is disrupting family remains. Remember, Damian Wayne is the only real biological son of Bruce. But when you're Dick Grayson, and from the time you were a child until the time you're an adult, you fought alongside Bruce Wayne, he might as well be family. He might as well be a father figure or a brother or something along those lines. And so to Dick Grayson, Thomas and Martha Wayne might as well be grandparents. That's really what they are to him, because he's so close to Bruce. And so the most logical step to take is to grab the remains and then whisk them off to Wayne Tower, put them in a bunker where they'll be safe and so that nobody can disturb them, and then perhaps even bring them back at some later point in time. But what this does is this switches over to a character named Boston Brand, also known as Deadman. Now, we talked about Deadman a little bit in the first video. We didn't really do him justice just because of the fact that I intended to do this tie-in, and he does have a much bigger role. And so I figured we would wait until this tie-in to actually beef up an explanation on him. But Boston Brand was a character who appeared back in 1967, and he was part of this wholesale attempt by DC to basically begin introducing the concept, or really focusing more on the concept of like mysticism, the dark arts, different things like that. Truth to tell, Superman is not the first superhero per se that DC had released. In fact, that really goes all the way back to 1935 and a guy named Dr. Occult. The difference is that Superman had powers. Dr. Occult was basically just a detective that focused on like superstitious things and so on and so forth. He dealt with the whole mystery and, angels and ghosts and different things like that. Most modern day superheroes are based on Superman, which is why people say Superman is the first superhero, quote unquote, one of the first characters, or really the first character, to have tried and true powers. But between Dr. Occult, characters like Zatara, who also appeared in Action Comics #1, the father of Zatanna, with these characters who have been created over the years, John Constantine in 1984, the idea was that DC wanted to begin moving towards the direction of saying, okay, so we have our superheroes, Wonder Woman, Flash, Batman, Superman, Green Lantern, and so on, and then we have the other side of the equation. We have ghosts, we have angels, we have demons, we have monsters, all that kind of good stuff. And all that is over here on this side with Deadman, Boston Brand, with John Constantine, with Jason Blood, with Dr. Occult, with Zatanna, all that kind of stuff. It's Vertigo, it's a whole different beast for the most part. The idea with Deadman, with Boston Brand, is that he was originally a guy who was murdered and basically was given the ability to jump from one host body to the next to find his murderer. Now, when it comes to Boston Brand, while he is able to possess bodies, he's limited by the body that he possesses. And so if, for example, he were to like possess Superman, and then he were to turn around and possess Batman, he would not be able to carry the powers of Superman with him over to Batman. It doesn't work that way. Instead, what he basically does is just jump from one body to the next. Now, when he possesses a body, he has full access to all their memories, all their experiences, and so on, and all that went towards him trying to track down the person that killed him. But in this instance, what Boston Brand actually reveals here is that these dead bodies that are coming back to life are not the actual dead bodies of people, which is to say, when his corpse comes back, it's not him as an individual who's an actual Black Lantern. Instead, it's just the bodies being used as puppets, more or less. It's really the way it is. The essence of him as a human being still floats around as a ghost. The body of Boston Brand is being used. Now, the reason why this matters is because it's not an actual resurrection from the dead. It's not like, Thomas and Martha Wayne, their spirits have been whisked away from the afterlife, thrown back into their bodies, and they're possessed, by the Black Lantern rings and suddenly start attacking everybody. It doesn't work that way. If that were the case, Boston Brand's spirit would have been restricted to his body, and then he would have been running around as a Black Lantern. And so the idea is that these are basically just corpses of people. Their essences still remain on, but they're basically just puppets that are being used for the purpose of the Black Lanterns to beef up their numbers. Now, at this point, we switch over to all these different villains. Again, when it came to the idea that the Black Lanterns were basically rising and that those people, villains, heroes, or otherwise who had died, were coming back, one of the things that the various superheroes began to do was take these villains of these various, take the bodies of these various villains and start whisking them away to safe places so the Black Lantern rings could not access them. In this instance, Black Lantern rings show up on this transport that's carrying all these bodies of these villains, and then they essentially get Black Lantern rings and they all just start running amok. And so again, things get a little crazy and things get a little hairy, because when it comes to this whole idea of Blackest Night and the dead coming back, it actually leads to some really, really cool discussions. Case in point, Dick Grayson begins talking to Damian Wayne, and the two of them are discussing the concept of death. Are they afraid of it? Now, of course, Dick Grayson's answer is no, but the reason why is because his role as a superhero is mired in death. His parents were killed, by Zuko. They were basically killed, because the circus owner, wouldn't bend to need a Zuko, and the result was that he sabotaged the Trapeze Act, the most popular act that that Haley Circus had going at the time, and as a result, Dick Grayson's parents were killed. His life is rooted in death. Who he is now is a byproduct of the fact that those he knows, those that he loved the most, were basically killed. For Damian Wayne, he's never really faced anything like this before. Damian Wayne's never really been in a situation where he had to face the fact that he was going to die, at least not yet. Now, there does come a point where Damian Wayne does die and is actually brought back, but at the moment, he's basically just this kid who is the biological son of Bruce Wayne. He was trained by the League of Assassins and ultimately handed back over to Bruce Wayne, and he became Robin, and that's really about it. He hasn't had to face his own mortality before, and that's why this is sort of cool, is because this is basically a young kid who, in all forms and fashion, also outside of the physical structure of his body, is an adult in a lot of different ways, being forced to look at the idea that a time will come when he will die. Now, of course, this immediately is really kind of cut short by the arrival of Boston Brand, who just basically jumps into the body of Dick Grayson and then just starts sputtering all this nonsense about, they're coming back and they're hungry and so on and so forth. And of course, it creates some panic because Robin has no idea what's happening. All he knows is that Dick Grayson's having like an episode. He just starts freaking out, babbling at the mouth about Black Lanterns, about how they're consuming people's hearts, how they're dying for energy, all that kind of good stuff. Now, of course, again, we covered that aspect in the first part of the Blackest Night videos, which is to say that the Black Lanterns themselves basically empower the central power battery, the source of their abilities, by going around invoking all these emotions in people. When they evoke emotions like hate, fear, different things like that, it literally just charges up their hearts. And so the Black Lanterns kill them, can reach into their chests, consume their hearts, and that energy goes into the Black Lantern core, the Black Lantern central power battery, providing it more energy and ultimately raising it to 100%, which would allow Nekron, the living embodiment of death in the DC universe, to walk into the earthly plane. So again, it's pretty cool in terms of how this unfolds, because it all really begins to tie together. Now, of course, because Damian Wayne has no experience with Deadman, but Dick Grayson does, ultimately Deadman jumps from Dick Grayson into Damian Wayne. And this is when Dick Grayson begins to realize what it is that's happening. Now remember, really, Dick Grayson knowing who Deadman is, it's just a byproduct of having fought as Robin alongside Batman for so long. When you're that sidekick, you just basically get a tour of everything in the DC universe. You get a tour of all the magic, all the sorcery, all the other superheroes, all the villains, different things like that. You fight alongside Superman in a multitude of different scenarios. So you basically learn everything that you need to learn. Not only this, Dick Grayson comes to the realization that if the graves of Thomas and Martha Wayne have been disturbed and that these rings are flying around and resurrecting these dead folks, then it makes sense that it's only a matter of time before the rings seek out two other sets of parents. The first being his own, the second being the parents of Tim Drake. Now, of course, when this happens, when they arrive at this, this gravesite, only to discover that that the parents of Dick Grayson have resurrected, then we also end up finding out that the parents of Tim Drake have also come back. Now, Tim Drake's an interesting scenario when it comes to the Batman landscape. When it comes to the chronology of the Robins, the first Robin was Dick Grayson, the second was Jason Todd, the third was Tim Drake, and the fourth was Damian Wayne. Tim Drake is one of those characters whose popularity is contextual, which is to say, people only really liked him when he's Robin, and the people who liked him the most were people who basically grew up with him. So when they followed Tim Drake, when he first popped up and he became Robin, then he moved beyond Robin and he became Red Robin, those fans maintained their love for him. They were just like, I don't care whether he's Red Robin, I don't care whether he's Robin, whatever, I love Tim Drake. Other people, on the other hand, who were not as familiar with his character, maybe read about him in passing or different things like that, were really relegated to either being fans of him as Robin or fans of him as Red Robin. It was just whenever they happened to pick up his comics. So again, that's par for the course when it comes to comic books, right? Like, fans latch on to a particular character for whatever reason. Some fans even, and I'm not really sure why, but some fans even tie their identities into those characters. If you don't like that character, you don't like me. I'm not really sure why people do that, but some folks do. But regardless of the scenario, people grow to love these particular comic book characters. And so ultimately what ends up happening is that with this revelation, with Tim Drake as Red Robin being recalled to Gotham City, ultimately it is the, Batman spotlight being thrown up into the sky, and Dick Grayson realizing we have to answer the call. Now, because of the fact that Deadman can only really be seen by those that he's possessed or those that he chooses to allow to see him, what ends up happening is he actually just races off and does a little bit of like recon work, and this ultimately leads to Dick Grayson and Damian realizing that they cannot beat these Black Lanterns through fists. Instead, what they need are all manner of weapons they can get their hands on, because again, for the most part, they don't really know how to combat these guys. They don't really know how to defeat the Black Lanterns per se. Again, fighting, punching, different things like that doesn't really do any good. And so what they do is they actually travel to an armory and they basically load themselves up with everything, rocket launchers, flamethrowers, the whole 9 yards. I mean, they are ready for war. It is, man, Katie bar the door. They are prepped for battle. And so again, what this also does is it leads into the idea that the Gotham City Police Department, of course, basically led by Commissioner Gordon, is having his men just slaughtered all over the place because these Black Lanterns, again, basically thrive on death. Charge people, emotionally charge people with fear, anger, rage, all that kind of good stuff. The hope that things will get better, so on and so forth. And when their hearts are at their absolute peaks, kill them, eat them, and then feed the Black Lantern Central Power Battery. And so that's exactly what's happening here. The fact that there's some guy that's basically patrolling around, going around the Gotham City Police Department that none of the cops can kill, but who in turn is killing every cop he comes across, terrifies everybody. It's absolutely horrifying. At the same time, for Commissioner Gordon, it's not just his guys that is worried about, his different police. It's really Barbara Gordon that he's concerned about more so than anybody else. Now, the events of Barbara Gordon, in terms of her being confined to a wheelchair, again, this is all basically aftermath of the Killing Joke. Now, the funny thing about this is originally the Killing Joke was never in continuity. It was just a story out there somewhere where it was basically just, the Joker shot Barbara Gordon, and then he made, her father, Commissioner Gordon, look at all these lewd pictures of her. As far as I'm aware, the actual writer of the story never said that Batman killed the Joker. Alan Moore, the guy who originally wrote the story, he never said Batman killed the Joker. I think it was Grant Morrison who said he believed Batman did, but Grant Morrison never wrote it. So for all the weight that carries, I say Batman didn't kill the Joker, and now we're even. So the idea is that with Barbara Gordon, with the Killing Joke being so popular, DC rolled it over into continuity, and the result is that Barbara Gordon went forward paralyzed. And so at this moment right now, she actually serves the role of a character called Oracle. And in truth, I think that's actually the best iteration of her character, because she was basically the brains behind the operation, the behind the scenes character who was feeding all these superheroes all this intel on how to take down these different villains and so on and so forth. She basically became a linchpin for the intelligence arm of the superhero community, which was really, really cool within the realm of DC. But the issue here is that Barbara Gordon is confined to a wheelchair, which means she can't just run off. She's basically stuck to being able to move as fast as she can. Now, Commissioner Gordon literally shields himself from every possible thing, or shields her from every possible thing that could kill her. But at the end of the day, it's trying to get her out of there as fast as he can, but at the same time, she doesn't necessarily want to leave. And that's why a lot of people loved the character of Oracle, because it's not like she was last in, first out. She was like, look, I'm here, and I'm going to stay here until this is done. And that's one of the reasons why she was so cool, is because like she would fight until the bitter end. Like she would, she'd fight just like anybody else. Now, of course, what we also end up finding out is that these various villains that had escaped, this transport with Black Lantern rings were the ones who had initiated this whole, Batman searchlight in the process. And so, of course, with Dick Grayson, with Damian Wayne showing up here, flamethrowers, the whole 9 yards, what they end up doing is staving these guys off as best they can. But then we also end up having Boston Brand jumping into the body of Barbara Gordon. Now, the problem with this, and the idea of this, is that Boston Brand believes that he can actually save Barbara by basically getting her out of there. Now, the problem with this, of course, is that this goes back into the idea that Boston Brand, Deadman, is confined to the abilities of the body he possesses. In this instance, Barbara Gordon has lost her ability to walk. Therefore, Boston Brand, while in his body or in her body, cannot walk. And so, of course, it allows him to be a little more ingenuitive than Barbara Gordon usually would be, in the sense of just kind of jumping out, but also using this, these various bits of knowledge that both he has and she's learned over the years. But one of the big things is that in possessing her body, he actually realizes there's a lot of history between Dick Grayson and Oracle, which is to say, they were a romantic couple for quite some time, and it was pretty hot and pretty heavy. I mean, they really, really got into it with one another. But the idea here is that it's basically just kind of, again, hitting back home at the nature of Boston Brand, hitting back home at what it is that he's capable of, these different things that he can do. What they also end up finding out is that with these Black Lanterns, they can be defeated. They can be taken out. And the way that we learn this is actually pretty cool. Initially, it comes by way of a couple things. The first is the demon Etrigan, and the second is really just by way of sheer ingenuity from Dick Grayson. Now, when it comes to Etrigan, he's actually one half of the equation. Really, Etrigan and Jason Blood share this kind of Bruce Banner Incredible Hulk dichotomy, in the sense that where the Incredible Hulk's just a byproduct of genetic manipulation at the hands of a gamma bomb when Bruce Banner tested it and got caught in the blast. Etrigan is actually a demon who is bound to the soul of a guy named Jason Blood. But what it does is it allows Etrigan to pop up every once in a while. And so because of this, when Etrigan does show up, all hell breaks loose, because it's basically a demon from hell, just unleashing absolute chaos on the world. Now, in truth, the arrival of him being here just comes by way of Deadman, in the sense that Deadman simply shows up knocking on the door of Jason Blood. Jason Blood turns him away. Deadman jumps into the body of Jason Blood and then simply utters the incantation, utters the phrase, "Gone, gone the form of man, arise the demon Etrigan." And so what this ends up doing is it allows Etrigan, as he's possessed by Deadman, to show up on the battlefield. Now, the other half of this is that with the forces of Batman, of Dick Grayson and, Damian Wayne and Red Robin and so on, going in and trying to figure out a way to defeat these Black Lanterns while at the same time getting as many people to safety as they can, what ends up actually happening here is really Red Robin stumbles across his own father. And this is cool, because unlike the other Black Lanterns, his father's actually a good guy. His father's basically like, hey, look, no matter what happens here, I'm proud of what you've done. I'm proud of everything that you've accomplished. Now, all this basically seems to go away in the face of the fact that all these different members, Dick Grayson, Damian Wayne, Tim Drake, so on and so forth, they're all basically made to face these nightmares of sorts, in the sense that with Zuko having been the person that was responsible for the death of Dick Grayson's parents, Zuko's arrival literally just like signifies absolute hatred on behalf of Dick Grayson, and he literally just lashes out and starts attacking. Now, the other half of this is that their impending deaths are actually staved off by the arrival of Etrigan. Like literally, Etrigan possessed by Deadman shows up using Hellfire and using all these different abilities that he has, is able to stave off against all these different Black Lanterns and really just kind of give a moment of panic. Now in truth, because Etrigan is a demon, him being bonded to the Black Lanterns would be a huge benefit to the Black Lantern Corps. The problem with this is he doesn't really have a heart to speak of. And so the result is that as he's possessed, or at least as the Black Lanterns try to kill him and take his heart, ultimately they're unsuccessful. This coincides with the fact that that Etrigan actually banishes, Deadman from his body and says, I don't know what it is you think you're doing, and I have no idea what's going on here, but I'm not worried about it. I got bigger fish to fry, and just takes off. Like he literally just leaves. He just bails out. And so again, what ends up happening is Dick Grayson, using one of the guns of Mr. Freeze, actually freezes himself, Damian Wayne, and Tim Drake. And then the Black Lanterns are just kind of left looking for them, and they can't actually find out where they're at. And so it's really just kind of like a shielding, basically duping them. And it's cool the way it plays out. And the reason for this is because of the fact that once the Black Lanterns leave, this allows Batman, it allows his team to go forward and basically say, okay, so this is like a stopgap measure. This is a way to basically hide yourselves from the Black Lanterns. The problem with this is that it's not a foolproof way. You have to actually defeat the Black Lanterns as opposed to hiding, but it does allow a way for a superhero to basically remain hidden if things end up going to pot too hard too fast. And that's what we're going to find with a lot of these tie-ins. We're going to find moments where heroes basically find a way to stave themselves off from the Black Lanterns, ultimately leading to the second half of the story, which is when things really get nuts. So with that being said, guys, if you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and yeah, I will catch you all later. Peace.